I'm going to have you removed and the property locked down, Judith snarled, jabbing her finger at my chest like I'd just broken into Fort Knox. This community doesn't allow unapproved residents. I hadn't even shut the car door when her clipboard started smacking against the cabin like it had a badge. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up with their lights off, clearly tired of whatever HOA drama they'd been dragged into. What Judith didn't know, and this is the delicious part, I'd just signed a deed that didn't just include this cabin, it included the dirt under her house, too. So if you've ever been fined for planting the wrong flowers or using a blue tarp instead of beige, buckle up. Because I'm Wes Harper, and 3 days ago I bought a peaceful mountain home. What I didn't know was that I'd also purchased a front row seat to a neighborhood circus, and accidentally became the ringmaster. Leave a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? If you're into wild, real-feeling stories with twists, poetic justice, and just the right dose of HOA madness, hit that subscribe button right now. Tomorrow's story, it's even more jaw-dropping. And the surprise coming next? Yeah, you're gonna want front row seats for that one. Let me back up. My name's Nolan King. 3 days ago, I sold my software company for $45 million and decided it was time to trade bandwidth for birdsong. So, Ellie and I bought a place in Timber Hollow, 890 acres of Wyoming wilderness, a cabin overlooking a pristine lake surrounded by silence and tall pine. The ad called it the Blake Estate, which made me laugh. Sounded fancy enough for a Bond villain, but all I wanted was a place to decompress. What I didn't expect was that our first welcome committee would be a woman who carried more paper citations than a traffic cop at the Indy 500. 10 minutes after we parked, the sheriff showed up. Apparently Judith had called in a trespassing situation. She actually told the deputy that we were unidentified vagrants with an unregistered vehicle. I handed him the purchase documents with a smile while Judith rattled off some nonsense about bylaws and property vetting procedures. The officer looked through the paperwork, sighed like a man used to HOA theatrics, and told Judith to let it go. But if you think she gave up, you've clearly never met someone who thinks a laminated pamphlet outranks the U.S. Constitution. Here's the kicker. Judith had no idea that when I bought the Blake Estate, I didn't just buy the cabin. I bought the roads, the woods, the lake, and, most inconveniently for her, the land beneath her very own home. But I wasn't about to tip my hand on day one. I figured if she wanted to flex power she didn't have, I'd let her play her part a little longer. Besides, I was curious how deep this fantasy went. Turns out, deep. By sundown, I'd already received 11 emails from something called the Timber Hollow Compliance Board, citing violations like non-earth tone vehicle presence and unauthorized outdoor body language. So if you've ever been fined for having the wrong shade of mulch or been cited for improper wind chime acoustics, you're gonna love what happens next. Judith thought she was queen of the cul-de-sac, defending community values one petty infraction at a time. She didn't realize she was standing on land I legally owned. And me? I wasn't just another city guy trying to escape the noise. I was the one holding the deed to her kingdom, and I had every intention of collecting. The next morning, my inbox looked like it had been assaulted by a fax machine with a grudge. 41 emails, all from Judith Camden, all stamped with the blazing authority of something called Timber Hollow Compliance Oversight. I didn't know whether to laugh or call tech support. The subject lines alone could have passed for performance art. Violation, non-earth loan luggage detected. Emergency, aggressive windshield surface. It was like HOA Mad Libs written by someone who took online bylaws training at midnight during a thunderstorm. I hadn't even unpacked my socks, and apparently I'd already violated the spiritual harmony of the neighborhood just by existing. Ellie wandered into the kitchen in her robe, saw my face, and asked, "Did someone die?" I spun the laptop toward her. Worse! Judith discovered our doormat isn't beige enough. She choked on her coffee. No exaggeration. One of the emails actually listed non-neutral fiber welcome accessories as a finable offense. Another claimed our porch light produced unnatural luminescence, inconsistent with nocturnal tranquility. I stared at the screen and muttered, "Should we just hang a lantern and hope for the best?" The best part? Each violation had a fine attached, anywhere from $125.00 to $750.00, and a handy payment link to something called the Timber Hollow Reserve Trust. I checked the routing number. It didn't match any non-profit registry, bank, or HOA. Might as well have said, "Send funds directly to Judith's Vacation Margarita Fund." Now, most people would be angry. Me? I got curious. Because when someone invents a crime like insufficient mulch blending, they're either deeply bored or deeply scheming. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, Alex Duong, and started planning my response. But not a legal one. No, I wanted to see how far Judith was willing to take this performance. So instead of fighting back, I leaned in. I became the world's most obedient fake criminal. First, I rented the blandest SUV I could find. Technically earth tone, but looked like someone dipped a marshmallow in khaki and left it out in the sun. Then I repositioned our mailbox 2 degrees south-southeast and sent Judith a time-stamped video of the realignment, narrated like it was a NASA launch. It was performance art meets HOA compliance. Every absurd request she made I honored, with precision paperwork and pictures. I measured our welcome mat against Pantone swatches. I submitted a form requesting permission to breathe on Tuesdays. I even installed solar-powered squirrel deterrents because one email accused us of unregulated wildlife encouragement. And each time I replied, I used her tone, legalese-laced nonsense that sounded important but meant nothing. Dear President Camden, thank you for your recent concern regarding our improper driveway gravel distribution. Please find attached a full geological report and drone footage outlining our realignment efforts, effective 4:32 p.m. MST. I signed every email. Nolan King, resident, under conditional consideration. You could almost hear her rage vibrating through the Wi-Fi. But while I was clowning with compliance, the vibe around the neighborhood started shifting. Fast. People stopped looking at us. A man walking his dog literally crossed the street when I came out to check the mailbox. Ellie waved at a woman pruning roses, and the woman dropped her shears like they were radioactive. It was the social version of being ghosted in real life. And then came Miguel Torres. He was the local plumber, mid-30s, flannel shirt, practical guy. I flagged him down while he was servicing a neighbor's irrigation system and asked if he could take a look at our hot water line. His face changed, like I'd just asked him to rob a bank. "Look, Mr. King," he whispered, glancing around, "you seem like good people. But Judith? She made it real clear anyone who works with you loses their HOA contract. She's already told the landscapers, the electricians, even the guys who clean gutters, I got 2 kids. I can't risk that." And just like that, it all clicked. Judith wasn't just playing compliance cop. She was running a neighborhood protection racket. I walked back to the cabin, not just annoyed but disturbed. This wasn't about porch lights or mailbox angles. This was fear. Manufactured, weaponized fear. She had made people believe that asking questions was dangerous and that silence was safety. And honestly, I'd seen that trick before. In boardrooms, in politics, in tech culture. But in a town with only 17 homes and a general store that closes at 6, this wasn't a power structure, it was a one-woman fiefdom with a clipboard crown. And that's when I remembered something in the paperwork Alex had me sign. A weird clause about inclusive land entitlements exceeding community boundary definitions. At the time, it sounded like legal fluff, but now it sounded like a trap door. A trap door that Judith might have been standing on. Back inside, Ellie was arranging a tiny stack of the fines like they were playing cards. "Think she's bluffing?" she asked. I shrugged. If she is, she's got a great poker face and an awful legal team. That afternoon, I reread every document Alex had forwarded during the purchase of the Blake estate, and right there in black and white, it hit me. The property wasn't just the cabin. It included the lake, the roads, and something else. Something Judith had either ignored or never known. The parcels beneath all 17 homes were part of the same deed. I didn't just buy a retreat. I bought the entire foundation this community stood on. And if Judith thought she had power before, she was about to find out what happens when you find the man who owns your foundation. But I wasn't ready to drop that bomb. Not yet. Because power's funniest when it overplays its hand. And Judith? She was getting ready to deal herself right out of the game. That night, just before bed, another email landed. Notice of pending community evaluation review. Failure to submit resident biography. Apparently, she wanted my resume, a list of previous neighbors, and 3 character references from former HOAs. Ellie burst out laughing. Should I list my Girl Scout troop leader? I just smiled and hit reply. Dear President Camden, please find enclosed my updated biography, including past experience with artificial turf compliance and feral squirrel mediation. And trust me, this game was just beginning. Because while she thought she was fencing me in with bylaws and scare tactics, she didn't realize I had already stepped outside her imaginary lines and found the deed she'd never wanted me to see. And what's coming next? It's going to hit harder than a violation for air particle disturbance. Stick around. The clipboard queen has no idea what she's standing on, and that's about to matter a whole lot. If you think 41 fake violations is where the crazy ends, oh, you're in for a treat. Because next time, the neighbors start talking. And what they reveal? Let's just say Judith's clipboard isn't the only thing she's been using to control people. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming. Trust me, this HOA drama is just warming up. It started with binoculars. That's how you know things have officially tipped from quirky to unhinged. Ellie was making coffee when she caught a glimpse of Judith crouched behind her front porch railing, scanning our cabin like she was bird-watching for misdemeanors. One hand on binoculars, the other clutching her phone, her whole posture screamed, Timber Hollow Security Division, population, me. Every time I stepped outside, whether it was to sip coffee or sneeze into the wind, Judith logged it like I was conducting classified reconnaissance. She even filmed me adjusting a patio chair and posted it on the community board under the heading, New Resident Displays Suspicious Outdoor Rearrangement Behavior. I'm not kidding, that was the title. And just like that, we weren't neighbors, we were suspects. Ellie, bless her curiosity and rage, dove headfirst into the HOA's online world and found an entire message thread labeled King Watch. Posts ranged from possible use of non-sustainable deck stain to observed guest vehicle with unknown license plate. Community threat? These people weren't asking questions, they were building a case. One neighbor, who I hadn't even met, wrote, He walks too confidently for someone with nothing to hide. Ellie read that one out loud and burst out laughing, which was refreshing because it was either laugh or throw the laptop into the lake. But underneath the humor was something darker. Judith wasn't just enforcing rules, she was shaping narrative. She'd created an echo chamber of paranoia and positioned herself as the sole protector of some imaginary suburban utopia. The only thing missing was a fake badge and a golf cart with sirens. Now, I've spent enough time in corporate boardrooms to know when someone's running a scam on confidence alone. Judith didn't need facts, she needed volume, and that's exactly what we got. 27 new violation emails in 2 days. One cited excessive potted plant population. Another referenced non-standard rocking chair motion velocity. I didn't even know rocking chairs came with speed limits. Ellie suggested we install a turnstile at the front door just to mess with her. I considered it, but instead I called my lawyer, Alex Duong, and said, Hey, remember that line in the deed about inclusive parcel rights? I think we're sitting on something bigger than a tax break. There was a long pause. Then he said, You want me to start digging? I said, Hard. 3 days later, Alex called me with a tone I hadn't heard from him since we took down a predatory VC group back in 2017. Nolan, he said slowly, you didn't just buy a cabin. And Judith, She's not just annoying, she's dangerous. He had pulled public employment records, court filings, and campaign donations. Turns out Judith had been quietly fired from her previous job as a senior finance officer for misappropriating marketing funds. Code for "we caught her skimming and cut a deal." No jail time, but definitely not a glowing LinkedIn reference. But here's the part that made my coffee taste colder. Judith didn't get elected HOA president. There wasn't a vote. There wasn't even a functioning HOA board. She just printed some letterhead, made herself queen, and started fining people, like it was a game of Monopoly she refused to lose. So that explained the fear, the silence, the nervous neighbors, and the whispering plumber. Judith had built a system of intimidation based on nothing but volume, confidence, and the community's exhaustion. She took over during a transition period when the last legitimate HOA president stepped down, and no one wanted the headache, so she stepped in, filled the vacuum, and made it look official. But none of it was legal. Her bylaws weren't filed. Her accounts weren't registered. Her fines? Straight-up extortion with a nicer font. Ellie said it best. She's a fraud with a clipboard, a cult leader in khakis. I knew then that the only reason Judith was watching us so closely was because she knew we might be the ones to unravel her whole empire. Instead of confronting her, I leaned back and let the show run. Judith escalated exactly as expected. We received a hand-delivered notice accusing us of non-traditional porch congregation. That's right, she flagged us for sitting on our own porch chairs with too many guests, a whopping total of 4 people. Then came the icing on the anxiety cake. She sent Ellie a certified letter demanding she attend an aesthetic reconciliation committee to discuss her unauthorized footwear color scheme. Ellie read that one in silence, then looked at me and said, "You know what? Let's break her." The moment had arrived. Alex confirmed that not only was Judith's power fabricated, but if we wanted to, we could file for an injunction and a cease and desist order based on impersonation of a governing body. But I had a better idea. "Let's give her just enough rope to get tangled," I said, because people like Judith don't implode from confrontation, they implode from exposure. So we waited. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything. Emails, flyers, posts, recordings. Neighbors began to notice the absurdity too. One guy stopped me by the mailbox and muttered, "You're not the problem, man. She's been like this since the ducks got loose in 21. Apparently, that incident involved a rogue waterfowl incident and a fine for unauthorized wildlife trafficking. I couldn't make this up if I tried. And just when I thought Judith couldn't get weirder, she did. One night, I stepped outside and saw her walking the perimeter of our yard with a flashlight and what looked like a measuring tape. Ellie filmed her from the kitchen window. No shame, no sneaking, just pure HOA authority cosplay in action. But here's the thing. Her confidence was starting to crack. Her posts on the community board got more aggressive, her tone more frantic. She even accused someone of failing to maintain a respectful gaze when passing her house. The unraveling had begun, and the thread? We were holding it. That night, I called Alex back and asked, "How soon can we go public with what you found?" His voice was calm, but firm. "Soon, but, Nolan, before you drop the hammer, there's one more thing. Something I just confirmed this afternoon. That inclusive parcel rights clause, it's not just an odd real estate perk. It means your deed includes every square inch of the land beneath Timber Hollow, roads, trails, utilities, and every foundation under every house, including Judith's." I sat in silence, staring out at the moonlit trees, thinking about all the fake power she'd wielded while standing on land that didn't even belong to her. I said, "Alex, that changes everything." He replied, "Yeah, and I think Judith knows it." And right there, I realized the real reason she was watching, not because we broke the rules, but because we were the rules now. What comes next? Let's just say, if you thought binocular surveillance was wild, wait until you see what Judith tries when she realizes the ground beneath her feet has shifted. Literally. Finding out you own the ground under someone's house is kind of like realizing you've been arguing with a puppet while holding the strings the whole time. Alex's voice echoed in my head all night. "You don't just own the cabin, You own every inch of land Timber Hollow sits on. I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, looking out over the pine trees like I'd just inherited a very weird kingdom. Meanwhile, Judith was out there patrolling her imaginary empire, clipboard in hand, walking on property that legally belonged to me. It wasn't just ironic, it was poetic. She had built herself a little dictatorship on land she never owned. And now, the landlord had arrived. And I had receipts. But this wasn't about lording over anyone. I didn't want a power trip, I wanted clarity. And maybe a little barbecue justice. So we mailed handwritten invitations to every household in Timber Hollow. No HOA nonsense, no fine print. Just ribs, coleslaw, lemonade, and an open yard. Ellie called it the Sanity Summit, and surprisingly, people came. 14 out of 17 households showed up. Kids ran barefoot, neighbors brought deviled eggs, and someone even showed up with a guitar. It felt like what this place was supposed to be, calm, connected, unpretentious. Except for one spectator, Judith. She stood at her fence, binoculars in one hand, phone in the other, live streaming our unauthorized gathering to the community board like she was covering a riot at the local library. And the craziest part, no one cared anymore. You could see the shift. Neighbors who had avoided us for weeks were now laughing, relaxing, actually making eye contact again. It turns out nothing breaks fear faster than shared potato salad and a few lawn chairs. Even the ones who still looked nervous began to lean in, like they were testing the waters of life beyond the clipboard. And that's when Carl showed up, Judith's husband. I'd only seen him from a distance, usually about 3 steps behind her, always holding something. Mail, groceries, dignity, but tonight he came alone. He walked up the drive with a cardboard file box clutched to his chest like it might explode. "Mr. King," he said softly, "I need to give you this, and I need to ask that you don't tell her I did." He handed me the box and looked around like he expected her to pop out of a bush with a cease and desist. "It's her files. Copies of everything, fines, threats, blackmail notes. I kept backups. I don't know why. Maybe I knew this day would come. Maybe I was just tired of watching her destroy everyone's life, including mine." He looked like a man who had been underwater for a very long time. "She's been targeting anyone who didn't fall in line, threatening credit scores, reporting people to employers, making up violations just to push out families she didn't like." I asked him, "Why now?" He sighed. "Because you're the first person who didn't fold, and if you're standing, maybe we all can." That box was heavier than it looked. After Carl left, Ellie and I sat down at the dining table with that box between us like it was a bomb we weren't sure how to disarm. Inside, gold, paper trails, emails, printed screenshots, handwritten notes in the margins of meeting minutes that had never legally happened, lists of neighbors labeled compliant, borderline, and problematic. There were contractor blacklist instructions, neighborhood watch memos, full of total fiction. And the most disturbing part? Personal files. I found one with Miguel Torres's name on it. Inside, a drafted complaint to the state licensing board claiming he had ongoing substance issues. Absolutely false, of course, but enough to destroy a small-town business if filed. Judith hadn't just controlled the rules, she weaponized them. And now I had the entire playbook. But here's the part that surprised me most. I didn't feel angry. I felt responsible. Not because I caused this, but because I was the first person with enough leverage to stop it. I looked at Ellie and said, "She built a palace on land she didn't own, and now it's time we ask her to pack her things." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You sure we're not the crazy ones?" I laughed. "If we are, at least we throw better parties." Outside, the music was still playing and neighbors were still chatting. No fines, no warnings, just people remembering they were neighbors before they were subjects. And Judith? She was still watching, still filming, but the looks she got from the crowd told me everything. Her spell was breaking, and what was coming next would be her final unravel. We thought the worst was over. Turns out, Judith wasn't the kind of person to retreat gracefully. She was the kind of person who doubled down on delusion, then kicked in the door to make a point. Literally. Ellie and I had gone into town for groceries. Nothing dramatic, eggs, coffee, dignity. We came back to find our cabin door slightly ajar and muddy footprints across the hardwood. At first, I assumed it was an animal, until I noticed the chair in the living room had been moved 2 inches, and I mean exactly 2 inches. It was the kind of absurdly precise repositioning that screamed one thing: clipboard energy. I followed the trail with a sinking feeling. That's when I saw it, tucked behind a picture frame. A small, blinking camera, still recording. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was an exhausted kind of disbelief. Judith had broken into our home to plant surveillance, not even subtle surveillance. This thing was blinking like a Christmas ornament on steroids. I turned to Ellie and said, "Well, at least we know what her final card looks like." Before I could reach for my phone, it rang. Unknown number. I answered. And there she was. "Mr. King," she said, in the voice of someone who believes they're narrating a documentary about leadership. "I hope you understand now that this isn't personal. It's about protecting Timber Hollow from destabilizing influences. I suggest you leave before things escalate further." I stared at the camera while she talked. "You broke into my house," I said calmly. "You planted surveillance." She didn't deny it. Sometimes protection requires vigilance. The call ended. The reality began. I called Sheriff Reynolds, a man who had clearly dealt with enough HOA insanity to earn a medal. I told him what happened, showed him the video files, played the voicemail, and watched his expression go from mildly annoyed to professionally alarmed. "Mr. King," he said, rubbing his temple, "this is breaking and entering, illegal surveillance, and criminal intimidation. Those are felonies in this state." Within the hour, a cruiser pulled into Timber Hollow, and for once, it wasn't me being questioned. Judith was arrested on her front lawn, wearing her usual power suit and holding her clipboard like it was going to defend her in court. "This is a mistake," she yelled as the cuffs clicked on. "I am the duly elected president of Timber Hollow." I whispered to Ellie, "By who? The birds?" Now, if that had been the end of it, we could have chalked it up to local HOA drama gone rogue. But no, Judith had layers. 2 days after the arrest, I got a call from an unfamiliar voice. "Agent Sarah Collins, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Mr. King, we've been forwarded material related to Ms. Camden's activities in your community. We believe this may tie into a broader investigation." Broader? Try 3 states. Apparently Judith had been running versions of this HOA scheme in other small neighborhoods. Fake elections, fraudulent fines, personal accounts masked as community reserves. She'd built a small empire on fake rules and weaponized paperwork. And Timber Hollow wasn't the beginning. It was just the place where it finally collapsed. Ellie and I sat in silence as Agent Collins walked us through it. Judith had pocketed over $300,000, 0 cents in fees from multiple communities, none of which had legally binding HOA charters. She created the illusion of power and leaned on the fact that most people were too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to push back. And here she finally ran into someone who read the fine print. "She built a castle on sand," Ellie said. I added, "and kept telling everyone to admire the view." Agent Collins chuckled and said, "Well, Mr. King, thanks to your documentation, we're preparing federal charges. You've been more helpful than you realize." But I did realize, because it hit me then, we hadn't just exposed a fraud. We'd inherited the cure for HOA madness. And the real story? It wasn't about Judith's downfall. It was about the community she almost ruined, and the one we were just beginning to rebuild. 6 months later, Judith Camden was wearing orange and picking up trash by the highway. 4 years in federal prison plus $300,000, 0 cents in restitution, courtesy of the U.S. government and a community that finally found its voice. When the judge handed down her sentence, he called her actions a weaponization of authority cloaked in bureaucracy. I just called it Tuesday in Timber Hollow. They showed a courtroom sketch on the local news. Judith looking stunned, like the gavel had broken not just her case, but the illusion she'd lived in for years. Ellie framed the article for our cabin wall, right under the photo from our first community barbecue. And yes, right beside it, Judith's old clipboard. Found in a bush. Sun-bleached, cracked, useless, and museum-worthy. I'll admit part of me wanted to keep the land. Technically, I could have. I owned the roads, the foundations, the forest, the lake, the whole weird pie. But owning people's land felt too much like Judith's flavor of crazy, just with better stationery. So we wrote up a new agreement, 3 pages long, in plain English. No titles, no dues, just what we called the Hollow Code. Respect your neighbor, maintain your space. And under no circumstances may binoculars be used for community surveillance. Ellie added that line with a Sharpie and a little artistic flourish. Everyone signed, no lawyers needed. It felt like shedding 10 pounds of nonsense we didn't even realize we'd been carrying. The change wasn't just legal, it was emotional. You could see it in the way people started waving again. The mailman, Pete, actually stopped to chat. Miguel Torres got his contracts back, and then some. He became the community's go-to guy for everything from water heaters to fence repairs. Ellie organized a lending library in the old shed behind the cabin, and Mrs. Carver down the hill donated a dozen gardening books. As long as no one annotates with pen, property values spiked almost overnight, not because of amenities or bylaws, but because peace of mind is surprisingly valuable. Turns out, when you remove fear, people bloom faster than wildflowers in spring. But my favorite moment came about 2 months after the sentence. I was at the community center helping Ellie set up for our second barbecue, now affectionately called the Feast of the Freed. We had name tags, ribs, lawn games, and 0 meetings. Then she walked in. A new woman. Short haircut, blazer, clipboard, you know the type. She looked around, scanned the seating chart like it had violated her zoning expectations, and asked, "Excuse me, who's in charge of community standards here?" Before I could open my mouth, 3 neighbors beat me to it. "We don't do that here," said one. "We're allergic to standards, with capital S," said another. Miguel, bless him, just handed her a lemonade and said, "Relax, there's no HOA, but there is potato salad." She left within 10 minutes. I don't think she blinked once. That's when it hit me. Timber Hollow didn't just heal. It evolved. We didn't replace one ruler with another. We removed the throne altogether. We learned to talk instead of tattletale, to ask instead of accuse, and to grill burgers instead of grilling each other. And that kind of community? It doesn't need a president. It just needs people who give a damn without needing a title to prove it. Ellie calls it HOA immunity. Once you've survived one, you build up antibodies against clipboard tyranny. And we were fully vaccinated. Now, when folks ask me what happened here, I tell them the truth. Some HOAs were built to protect, others to control. But the land remembers who owns it. And in Timber Hollow, we finally started remembering who owns our lives. We buried the fear, composted the nonsense, and planted something better. The final tally? 1 disgraced HOA queen, 1 reconnected community, and 1 cabin that turned out to be so much more than a retreat. It became a revolution. Quiet, neighborly, and just loud enough to keep the next clipboard in check. Looking back now, it's almost funny how it all started. With a clipboard, a glare, and a woman convinced she ruled the woods. I thought I was just buying a peaceful cabin. Turns out, I bought the stage where a kingdom fell and a real community rose. And maybe that's the point. Power only works when people agree to pretend it's real. But when one person dares to read the fine print, to say, "This doesn't feel right," things start to shift. 1 barbecue, 1 honest conversation, 1 guy who decided that silence wasn't part of the mortgage. What we built in Timber Hollow isn't perfect. It's not gated, trademarked, or certified. It's just real. It's neighbors over nonsense, respect over regulation. It's what happens when you take your land back, not just the dirt under your feet, but the space in your life that belongs to peace. And as for me, I'm still here, still mowing my own lawn, still drinking my coffee with a view. And that clipboard, it hangs on the wall of the community center now, right next to a photo from our very first Feast of the Freed. One's a symbol of fear, the other, a celebration of what happens when people stop being policed and start being neighbors. If this story made you laugh, made you think, or maybe reminded you of your own HOA horror story, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear it. And if you believe in fairness, in justice with a little sarcasm, and in standing up when others sit quiet, go ahead and hit that like button. Better yet, subscribe. Because around here we've got more stories to tell, more clipboard Karens to retire, more communities to set free, one porch light at a time. Stick with us. The next story, let's just say, the HOA never saw it coming.